Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. Ooh, that's the sound of Halloween. Actually, I don't know why I started with that.
It's not Halloween yet.
No, but it could be close if you're listening to this. It's definitely on the horizon.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
We don't know exactly when this episode is coming out, but into the creative industries is why I went, ooh, because this is a really interesting topic because it is so firmly within the creative industries, yet also just on the edge of the creative industries, as all these other creative industries do their creative thing. Have I set that up nicely, James?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, we're going to talk about still photography, aren't we? And how it plays a part in the film and television industry. And I'm going to start you off with a philosophical question.
Ooh, okay.
Are you ready?
Oh no.
What is a photograph?
Well, I thought I knew, and then
Go on. What do you think a photograph is? Let's do this from the top. I don't have an answer, by the way.
It is an image. For me, photograph is different to image, but photograph is like something that represents the truth in some way. You understand what I'm sort of getting at?
I do. I think people have always thought that photographs represent, versus a painting or something else, represent a degree of kind of truthful authenticity about what the world from a particular vantage point looked like at a given split second of time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's still subjective, but it's truthful subjectivity, if that makes sense.
It is. And I think that is changing fast in the landscape of AI with all the alterations, because actually often images that we take aren't necessarily what the world did look like from that moment and that thing. But anyway, all of that is a huge philosophical tangent and is largely irrelevant to our conversation today, which is in fact to talk about the relation of stills to moving image, and how, I suppose, if you're a young person out there listening to this and you enjoy taking still photographs, and you might be like, well, that's a different thing, that's a different hobby from making films. Maybe there's a way that you can have a career and get these two interests to collide. So we are delighted to be joined today by Jack Merriman, who is a friend of mine and a long-term professional photographer on film and television sets. He's also done some incredible work photographing some of the most famous actors of our generation, including Sir Ian McKellen, Felicity Kendall, Roger Moore, Roger Allam, and he's done tons of great work, including Sherwood, the TV series, Alison Jack with Domhall Gleeson, Andrea Riseborough, etc. And it's just brilliant to hear a little bit about what it is to take stills on a film set.
Absolutely. So, without any further ado, let's find out all about it. Welcome to the podcast, Jack. How's it going?
Really good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. It's lovely to have you here. I think you were our first stills photographer, actually, which is very exciting.
Very good. Well, I'm honoured.
You get to hold the mantle. Is that the right phrase?
Hold the banner.
Banner.
Raise the banner. Raise the flag.
The standard bearer.
There we go. That's the one.
But we really do try to get all aspects of the industry, right? And get people from all the different facets, so that young people listening can go, oh, that's something I'm interested in, and how could I get involved? Yeah. And I know that we have lots of young people at Young Film Academy who are really interested in stills photography. Maybe they've just taken stuff on their phone and they're interested in that, but maybe they've done something, maybe they've used celluloid in a darkroom. Maybe they are taking photographs and playing with them in some softwares that we'll come to talk about later, I'm sure. But no, it's brilliant to have you on, Jack, and to talk about how a photographer, which might be seen by a lot of people to be a different thing from a filmmaker, but actually there is a ton of overlap, and there is a way to have a career in this industry. So maybe just kick us off with kind of what was the last thing that you were working on, and sort of give us a brief description of what you were up to on that.
Okay, so the thing that I worked on that just came out is Sherwood, the second series of Sherwood, which is a big BBC show with David Morrissey and Leslie Manville and Nigel Lindsay and a host of other people. And it was just aired on the BBC and was kind of called event telly. event television. And what I was doing the stills photography. I was sharing the job with two other photographers because it was a really big show. And so what it involved was being on set the whole time and with my camera and working out how to get shots from the show that looked like they're just taken from the show, but was actually obviously taken by me. And there's a load of different ways you go about it. And you really, there's no easy, quick sort of, this is the only way to do it. You've got to be very agile and work out the best approach to get what the company needs to sell that show or that film. So, I was very quietly being on set, and you'd be on set all day, and you're getting the stuff that people, I think, just imagine isn't done by a photographer and is just taken from the show, but is all 100% done by the photographer. And that also includes the behind-the-scenes stuff. So the director talking to the actors, the kind of the crew, everything like that, and the sort of jokey moments off camera or just before they start rolling or just after they finish rolling. So there's lots that's encompasses it. But the main thing is that it's the imagery that is used to sell the show or the film afterwards.
So I suppose that's really interesting, isn't it? It's almost like, are we talking about kind of, when you're on Netflix or you're on iPlayer and whatever, you've got that kind of banner art or thumbnail art where you've got sort of the picture that represents the show. Is that likely to have come from something you've shot, or how will that image work?
That's a really great question. And actually there's no one answer to it. Within photographers being on set and photographing a show or a film, there's two things really. One of them is unit stills photography, and that means that you are on the set most days, or the days that they want you there, the key days, and whilst the production is going on, you're in charge of getting the imagery of those key moments from the story that then they need to sell. Or they want to sort of get in the papers ahead of the airing of the TV show or it being in cinemas. So that is half of the job. And then there's also another job, which is often done by a different photographer who comes on set, but it's sometimes the same photographer. And that's called specials photography. And so that is when a photographer comes in with a big crew and they set up lots and lots of photography lights and backdrops, and then they shoot the actors in their costume, but it's very, very much like micromanaged to sell the show and sell the mood of the show, but it's very much not taken during filming. It's its own thing. So quite often that will happen once on a TV show or a film, and then the rest of the time it's unit stills photography. So sometimes a poster will feature something that looks like it was taken just from the actual film itself, and that will be a unit still. And then, so you'll often see it, especially historical ones often use it. You've got the actor, in the setting, and it really does look like it was just taken from the film, and then you've got all the details of the poster on there. But sometimes when they're looking straight at the camera and there's lots and lots of light on them and there's kind of backlight and everything else, then that will be a still. But you never really know, and I think they tend to capture both, and then the marketing people afterwards decide what the best way is to sell that particular product.
Perfect. And will you have a photographer who is a unit stills photographer ever doing the specials photography and vice versa, or are they kind of never the twain shall meet? You just do one or the other, and that's
no. So again, there's no one answer, but often it can be the same photographer. But you do get photographers who just specialize in unit stills, and you do get photographers who just specialize in that one day in a studio where all the actors come in and they've set up all their lights and it's just for the photography. So it really depends. One photographer can do both jobs, and sometimes they want a particular photographer to come in just to do those poster shots. But because of social media and because everything's online these days, and because the hunger, especially for those really popular shows and films, with big IP, for instance, they will want as much material as possible. So they'll want the stuff from set. They'll want the stuff that looks like it came from the actual show itself. And then they'll also want those kind of poster images too. So the bigger the production, the more money there is, the more a photographer's on set, and the more photography they'll want, because obviously there'll be a lot more interest in the actual show. So they'll want to feed the beast, if you know what I mean, in terms of publications and online and social media and all that stuff.
And you can keep doing those exclusive photographs, which is sort of exclusive release, which is easier to do if you've got sort of like tens of thousands of images to
exactly,
one by one do like an exclusive.
But this is one of the funny things about it, is because you'll be on set and say you photograph, maybe you deliver them 250, 300 images from one day's filming, and there's two things that are quite funny about it. One is you have absolutely no control over what they'll choose to use. So they might end up using ones that you would never have imagined they'd used, and the ones that you thought they absolutely would use, they don't. And the other thing is that you photograph it a year ago, and then the images just disappear and you don't know anything about it. And then suddenly the next thing you see, that the ones that they've chosen are suddenly spread all over the papers. So it's sort of you're as surprised as anyone else really when they come out. And it's quite exciting, but also you also are sort of dying for the photographs to be published so that you can start using them yourself.
And I suppose why, from a technical perspective, if I was a young filmmaker, and certainly I had this experience on my first films where I massively didn't rate the importance of stills photography on set. We'll come talk about that. But I suppose why, if I was a young filmmaker listening to this, and I'm just like, well, if I want still images from my film, why wouldn't I just take a screen grab?
Again, it's a great question, and you can see when people have done it. It's not done very often. The format that they use to film TV shows and movies are very different to the format that you photograph with. So it doesn't really work. The ratios won't be the same. The image quality won't be the same because they're very specific. A film camera can take stills from it, but it's very specifically giving a particular type of image that is then graded and worked on afterwards. And it doesn't translate to what a camera would pick up. Just the same that you couldn't really shoot a film or a TV show that effectively on most cameras. You could, and obviously there's been that one episode of that TV show that was made entirely on an iPhone, just to see if they could. I think it was an episode of House. But on the whole, it tends to be two separate things. And it's really important because it's not just the stills from the TV show or the film, but it's the behind-the-scenes stuff, and which obviously wouldn't be captured. And they need a huge bank of imagery to sell a show or a film. And so it's really, really important that they've got a photographer who's just dedicated to doing that. Whilst it does seem like, you go, why wouldn't you just use that? Actually, it's hugely beneficial to
it doesn't look
the
as
marketing.
Good, basically, does it?
And it doesn't look as good. No, it doesn't translate.
I heard that the megapixels, right? If you actually look at what the megapixels of like HD is, it's actually really low. I can't remember what it is exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because you'd have thought that if they are filming on like an IMAX camera and it's projected on IMAX, but it's just not the same. It's not geared towards being used as a piece of photography that
you're taking one frame, not 25 or 30, and then you're just focused
the motion blur.
Exactly. Frame.
Exactly.
So everything looks a little bit soft if someone's in motion, so you've got to find that one moment where they held their moment for like a good second.
But also the aspect ratio is also completely different to what photography is. So that wouldn't actually work, and as opposed to a photographer is framing it so that it can actually be looked at in the usual dimensions of a photograph, whereas obviously film is a very, very different aspect ratio.
Can I ask about the specials? I was just wondering in terms of like where they set up, like because you're saying that they sort of like come on set as well. So did they set up like a whole like little studio section like right near where the filming's taking place, or is that really does it depends. Happen on a different day?
Well, it depends on the schedule of the project, and it also depends on the budget, because someday they'll have for really big projects, they'll sometimes have a whole day dedicated just to doing specials. But quite often it will be a little studio that's been set up on the side of a soundstage or on the side of a location, and they've kind of rigged it all up, and then the cast are grabbed. They'll have a sort of half hour or an hour dedicated to it, and everything has to be set up right by the side of the set, and they're pulled aside for that. So there's no really one answer, but it depends on the scale of the project and timings and budget and schedules. So it can be either, really. But the main thing is, as with shooting on set, as a photographer, you get a very, very small window with them. And you have to really make an awful lot of imagery very, very quickly. Because sometimes on set, you might get them for 25 seconds, 10 to 25 seconds at the end of a scene. And you might be hanging around for 4 or 5 hours for them to finish the scene. And if you've not been able to photograph while they film, which is sometimes possible and sometimes not, you will literally they'll go, right, everyone hold for stills, and the lights stay where they are, and the extras stay where they are, and everything stays where they are. And then you really do get 20 seconds. And you either get it or you don't. So you just have to get it.
Do you start hearing the feet tapping during that section of people tapping their watches?
No, your internal your alarm clock is going off very loudly, going, you've had all the time you can have, you've got to let them go, So it's quite high pressured, but at the same time I quite enjoy it, because you'll have watched them filming it through the camera, and what I love doing is seeing what the cinematography is doing through the camera, and then you get to sort of reproduce it. So actually, it's a huge learning curve as a photographer as well, because obviously different cinematographers shoot things in entirely different ways, and you learn so much from that angle wouldn't have occurred to me, or shooting.
That's so interesting. So if the cinematographer has made a particular series of choices within the camera and within the lighting setup, you're almost looking at the director's monitor or producer's monitor before shooting, and you're sort of mimicking your settings to try to get your images to be as true to what they're shooting in camera as possible.
Yeah, I think what the main thing is that you want it to feel like it's in the same world. So something like Poor Things has such a clear aesthetic that you want it to feel like it's in the same world, your imagery, as the film itself. So in that particular instance, there's an amazing source photographer who always works with him and mimics. Or not mimics, but looks at what he's doing, and it influences his photography for that particular project. So I think you always want to feel like what you're photographing is in the same world as what's being shown on screen.
If you were on something like Poor Things, I know obviously there's so much amazing set work, isn't there? But then also it is a lot of green screen, I believe, as well, to sort of bring it all together. What would you do? Would you try to frame out the green screen? Would you try to capture everything in camera? Because otherwise maybe there's then an extra layer of work for the stills to be stills.
I mean, I think I personally have done a lot more that is quite sort of is all shot on real sets, and but the green screen stuff, I think it's a conversation with the technical team to see, well, if I photograph it from this angle with this green screen in, will that actually then work if they'll afterwards when they, replace the green screen with whatever it is. I think it works in quite a similar way to actually the filmmaking with the green screen, as much as they can take what you photographed and then put everything else in that needs to be in there. So I think that's very specific. But it's a conversation with the technical team to see how you create the overall picture through what you're photographing and what's put in afterwards.
I've got the most random question, chat, but I'm so dying to ask it.
Go on.
It's about film posters. Now, I don't know about you, but one of my pet hates over the years has been, if you look carefully at tons of movie posters, you see that the actors' faces are quite obviously photoshopped onto either their own body or someone else's body, but you can really see it. It is not a natural image. It's been
when they get the size, the scales sometimes off, isn't it?
Well, I don't understand whether that is because they're taking an actual image of a star in costume and then they're just going, we want to make their face bigger, or is it that they just don't have the right photograph, so they kind of take the body of someone else and stick their head on. But it's always done to be like, not always, but a lot of the images, you're like, oh my lordy, that is a terrible bit of Photoshop. Have you noticed this? Are you aware of it?
I mean, it's interesting because, like with so much in filmmaking, there's lots of people responsible for a final image. So the photographer does their thing, then it goes to a photo retoucher. And quite often with movie posters, you'll always get the ones that you think are great, and then you'll get the ones that you think, oh well, that I could have done that slightly differently. But the really, really good ones you won't notice that, and actually that won't be the thing that you notice. But the thing that you will notice is that it looks very sheeny and glossy, and to get it to that state, especially once all the credits are in there and everything else, there's so many people involved with pulling all that together. It's marketing teams, and it's photo retouchers, and it's photographers, and all sorts of people who are responsible for that final thing. So it can quite often be quite a big team of people working on it. And in the best scenarios, that glues together really, really well, and you end up with a really amazing looking movie poster. But as with all things, sometimes, you possibly can have too many cooks spoil the broth. But I mean, I don't often. But
you're not involved in that, exactly. So you're taking images that you pass on to those teams, and then, as you say, they kind of do with them as they will, I suppose.
Yeah. But I think it comes down to then how they market and sell the show or the film. And I often it's a lovely thing to see your images out in the world. So from the photographer's point of view, it's very rare that you would sort of go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was going to be used quite like this. It's actually quite an exciting moment when you actually sort of open a newspaper and your photo's there and really big, and you can call your mum and go, oh, pick up the Times today and go to page 4 and have a look at that. So that's
really really fun. And let's talk.
I just quickly googled some movie poster gaffs.
Can you see what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, no, I remember. I've seen a few of these before, because every now and then one of them will do the rounds on like social media.
They're often
and
with
stuff.
Massive actors. You'll get like Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and something, and you're like, is that because they had to take a picture of them at their house and then put it onto a person wearing a doublet in some medieval thing? Anyway, we digress. So, Jack, let's just talk about on set, because you and I have worked together and had the pleasure of doing that a number of times, and we've talked about this. So I learned my lesson really early, which was basically I never had a stills photographer on my first 2 films, and then often, and I think there may be young people listening to this who sort of go, oh yes, I recognize this. Someone says you will need stills. So then what you do is you ask someone who's actually doing another job to get the stills. And maybe they're not a professional photographer. Maybe they're doing a bit of gaffer. And you're like, well, you've got a bit of a camera, use your iPhone or something like this. That was always a terrible idea. And you don't think it's going to be that bad until you get to the point where you really, as you say, you want to put it to festivals. And festivals say in your brochure, show me pictures in your catalogue. You need a website with behind the scenes stuff. It's all that marketing and press that actually is not front of a filmmaker's mind. They're focused on, I want to tell this story. But actually, from a production point of view, you need all of that stuff. And so we've talked a lot about how photographers slightly on sets can get the bum end of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't really get the time. They don't really get the precedence that they might need. So maybe you can talk us through how that actually works. I know that you've mentioned shutterless or cameras that you can take without the sound of a shutter. Maybe there's that stuff. Yeah. Talk us through that.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things, really. The first thing is that being a unit stills photographer today is a very different proposition to about 15 years ago. Because 15 years ago, we didn't have mirrorless cameras, which have electronic shutters, which mean that you can photograph absolutely silently during a take. And that's a real game changer, because before that, you had what were called DSLR cameras, and they had the shutter that went... Exactly. So then what you had to have is like what they called a blimp, a massive casing for your camera. And it went in there, and it still wasn't completely silent. So sometimes you wouldn't even be able to. to use it, because the sound person would say, "Oh, I can still hear a muffled clicking noise." But you'd put it in this massive, massive thing that was like that big, and then you'd sort of be trying to photograph it, but you couldn't get actually access to it to change any settings or anything. So you had to be pretty sure that it was all as you wanted it. And then you'd be there with this massive thing, sort of saying, "Don't mind me, I've just got this."
I'm just fitting into the background here with this giant badger.
Pretend I'm not here, but of course it's impossible to, because you're there with this huge thing that's bigger than the camera that's actually filming the show. Whereas now you've got these cameras that are much more discreet. The quality of the image is much better. But in answer to your question about how you actually then get what you need on set, there's lots and lots of different ways. And it's what I love about filmmaking. I often say that the unit stills photographer is kind of a unique person on set, because it's the one person who no one needs to be there to actually make the TV show or the film. In fact, you're the one person slowing everything down, or you're the one person who thinks that people on set worry will be the person who slows things down, because everything runs to a very tight schedule always on set. It doesn't matter how big the budget. So you need to get, for the film company or the TV company, the key images, and there's lots and lots of different ways of doing it, and you've got to just get really, really expert at reading a room. If they're having a very stressful day, if they're running behind, if they've got actors who are having very emotional scenes and need their own space and don't want you around that much. So it's a real endless negotiation, and you've got to get really friendly with the assistant directors, which is my key piece of advice, actually, is you get on set and you've got to make great friends with the cameraman, with the grips, women, so the camera people and grips, and the assistant directors. And also, you've got to go and introduce yourself to the actors really early. You've got to sort of engineer it so you can, so that everyone knows you're there. And then you might be able to photograph during a take, but if it's a really, really small room and it's a really intimate moment, you won't be able to do that, in which case you have to keep on reminding and asking various key people to, can I have 20 seconds at the end before you take the lights down? So you've also got to get friendly with the lighting department. And, I love the challenge of that sort of coordinating everyone to get what you need. And if
you do get your 20 seconds, do they run the scene for you? Do the actors actually act it, or do they just stand there?
Yeah, so sometimes it's, again, completely up to them. Some actors will just go, will just sort of, take a moment and just sort of look at each other. And some will want to run the scene. So I've had it before where, this really famous actor wanted to actually just run the scene again as if they were doing a take. And it was like a take just for me. Whereas some actors really don't mind you photographing during the scene while they're filming it, in which case you can be right beside the camera. So sometimes you've got the camera there and you literally are right beside it, crouched down, wearing very dark clothes so that no one notices you. And you can photograph during. And that's the best case scenario, because then you're not slowing anyone down. But the trick is to be as quick and efficient as possible. But there's never one way of getting the image, and that's what I really love about it. It's the challenge of having to work out on that particular day with that particular crew in that particular situation how you get what you need to get whilst not slowing anyone else down.
Because if they're a producer, I can imagine there's a world in which you deliver at the end, or rather don't deliver, images for a certain scene, and the producers more or less say, "Jack, what are you doing? We don't have any good images for this particular scene," to which your response is, "Well, you never gave me any time to actually shoot." Is there a blame game that goes on there?
No, not ideally, no. And I've never really had that issue. But the other thing being, like I said, when you get on set, you've got to make friends with a lot of people very quickly, and you've got to keep the communication open. And one of the key things that I find is getting very friendly with the producers, as in, you go straight over, you introduce yourself, and all the way through you're talking, as the scene's going, you'll quietly go up to them and go, "Just to let you know, we haven't got the images we need for this scene. So it then becomes up to them if they want to push for it or if they feel like things are running behind.
So it's about communicating as you go.
Communication is the key thing, but like with all filmmaking. So, you'll have interviewed cameramen and editors and sound people and actors. Communication is the key thing because a set really falls apart without it. And so you become one of that team. And actually your aim is to not be the one person on set who everyone wishes wasn't there. Because if you can work quickly and efficiently and be friendly with people and keep the communication open, they don't mind having you on set, and chances are you'll get a little bit more of what you want than you would do otherwise. So it's fascinating. It takes a while to learn like the ebbs and flows of how to be on a set and be part of the team as opposed to be against the team. But it's a really key skill, but a really lovely one because you become part of the process.
Mm. Is the producer always your main liaison? Is that normally who you're speaking to leading up to a shoot? Is that who's normally hiring you as well? Like who do you have to schmooze to get those gigs? In fact, getting gigs, I think, probably is a whole
it's a whole other thing, yeah. So the people who get photographers on set typically are publicists. So they're the people who will be in charge of marketing the show. It'll also be down to the producers as well, but quite often you'll have an agency who have been brought on to market the show, and they'll be involved in the imagery from day one. So they will liaise with the production company or the network or the film company to decide what the key images are, but also who's our photographer going to be. And sometimes the publicist will say, well, here's a list of 3 or 4, choose one. Or sometimes the producer or the director will come and go, I've worked with this person before and I'd really like to use them again. In terms of getting into it and in terms of actually, as you said, schmoozing to get the job, it's really knocking on a lot of doors the whole time. That's all of filmmaking across all different departments. You just have to be constantly in touch with people, showing people new work, making phone calls to people. You knock on 100 doors and one opens, and that's the sort of as with acting, as with getting any job on set, you just knock on the doors.
And then I imagine there's repeat, right? If you work with somebody and it goes well, then they tend to get you back for the next show, and the relationship develops.
Exactly. So, for instance, if it's a TV company, for instance, or a network rather, you become friendly with the picture desk on that particular network. And that's the other key thing, is sometimes it's through publicists, sometimes it's through the picture department of a particular company. There's lots of different ways, and sometimes it's through the producer themselves, but the producer tends to be much more contact on the day of the shoot itself rather than leading up to it, because they've got 100 million things they're thinking about, but they might make the decision about who the photographer is. But like with all things, I always say to people, if they want to be involved in film or TV, people often don't think to contact producers and directors and say, I loved your work on X, Y, or Z. And actually, that always is worth doing, because chances are you'll actually get to actually have some contact with them. And everyone likes to know what worked for other people in terms of what they've done in the past. So that's another way in. There's lots of different potential ways of schmoozing your way into the job. Yeah. But it's just knocking on a lot of doors is the key, and never, ever giving up.
Yeah.
On that sort of promotional front, in terms of getting work and stuff, I had a question that I wrote down ages ago, which is an interesting question, I think. You've got one really cool cover photo on your website.
Yeah.
That you go to the website, there's the image, and then you have to press a button to see more. Mm-hmm. How on earth do you choose one image to represent your entire body of work and to entice people to click that button? Which, I mean, everyone has to do in some way, shape, or form. There's got to be something that people are confronted with to begin with. How do you choose that one image? And do you change it regularly? Do you get sort of, I don't know, buyer's remorse with putting that one photo up and constantly have to change it?
I think that the key, it's really interesting because, it's a lot of pressure actually to choose one photograph to say, this is me, or, click here and see some more stuff. And it's constantly evolving. And the great thing about websites these days is that it's very easy to change that up. It's 2 seconds. Whereas in the past, with old-fashioned websites, it would have been a sort of 4-week process of going backwards and forwards with the people who were designing the website and going, oh, no, that looks a bit rubbish. Can we do it again this way or that way? Whereas now, literally, it's a couple of clicks. I think that you've got to think really carefully, and this is about, setting your stall out about what kind of work you want to do personally. What are you interested in? What kind of productions? Are you interested in the Marvel universe? In which case, that's going to be your focus. Are you interested in British independent film? Because then that will be your focus. You've really got to think very specifically about sort of what your ideal.
Because otherwise you do become a bit of a jack of all trades, Jack.
Exactly.
But but there is a bit of a danger, and I suppose
of all steels.
I suppose that almost Jack of all stills. That should be on a t-shirt.
I'm going to use that. That's on my business
Instagram handle.
Jack of all stills. But that I suppose comes to the next point. I suppose a bit of like your style. And we've asked this to a few of our guests. We asked it to the, we were asking to some editors that we've spoken to. It's kind of almost why does a director get you? Do you think versus another editor? What's your special sauce? And actually, sometimes it's been a little. They've kind of gone, oh, I haven't really thought about that because obviously, let's take the base stuff. You're gonna arrive on time, be really nice, work really well, deliver clear in focus images, right? So you'd imagine
those are the basics.
Those are the basics, right? But then they're going to choose Jack Merriman versus another great stills photographer or another. So what do you think you see as your kind of, I suppose, house style, special sauce? What is it about your images?
I think it comes back to setting out your stall of what you're particularly interested in. And it will be, capitalizing on the jobs that you got that you particularly love doing and that you want to do more of. Especially with the kind of actors that you worked with that you'd love to work with again. So I think, as a more general thing, it's your special sauce is whatever you said it is, but it's you've got to have done enough of that particular thing. So it might be that you want to, work in big sort of period pieces, in which case you'd find something that is very period piecey that you photographed, and that would be your key image. But I think that at the beginning of your career, especially, you've got to take the jobs where they are, but then you've got to then make the most of the ones that chimed the most for you, and make that your special sauce. But as a photographer, that as I said earlier, there's no real sort of magical this is my unique style of photograph.
Because you're fitting in with each project, right? You're slightly chameleoning yourself to kind of replicate the look of a particular project. If it's desaturated colors and washed out, then you're going to make images like that. And if it's super bright and poppy, you're going to do that. Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, but if it's shot from really strange angles, or they use a fisheye lens a lot, or whatever it is, then chances are you're going to be doing a bit of that as well.
And I suppose a bit of this must come down to also the gear. We love a bit of gear chat here at Young Film Academy. So I've loved watching you on sets, and when you come and take some phenomenal images of our students at Young Film Academy summer camp.
It's the highlight of my year doing that. I loved it.
It's brilliant.
Honestly, it's the enthusiasm of those guys, of both your team, but also the students. Watching them fall in love with filmmaking in real time is such a privilege. It's wonderful. And you really can see little fires inside them being lit as they're finally hanging out with the people who understand what they're all about, and watching their creativity sort of just really ignite is wonderful. And they're just having the time of their lives. And for quite often you can see that this is the first time they've really connected with something in a really fundamental way. And it's such a privilege. I go every year. I spend a day with, as James knows, with the YFA summer camp, and watching these students making their films is just it's
very
lovely.
kind of you to say that. And also they love the photos that you take because they look amazing. Do you know what I mean? Like they as filmmakers look awesome, and we all know about
they're living their best lives in my
they just look so cool.
Yeah.
But you arrive on set with these sort of, I've called you the John Wayne of because you've got these two kind of like holster things where you've got a camera on one hip and another camera on another hip. So just talk to us, why have you got two cameras? What's the idea there?
Okay, so in terms of how you carry your kit, there's lots of different ways of doing it. Some people have got these kind of holsters that go like across your chest like that. Some have got a kind of more of a John Wayne holster thing. You've got two cameras because quite often if you get the chance to film, especially while they're actually filming themselves and you get a chance to photograph that, then you will want to be able to get both close-ups and sort of more mid or wide stuff. And so you need lenses that cover the full gamut, and you need to be ready for absolutely anything. And sometimes in very low light situations, you might have to go with prime lenses because you need to open up the lens a lot more, because sets are increasingly very, very dark for nighttime stuff because the sensors on the actual cameras they're filming on are incredible. And so they can film in very, very low light. So sometimes you'll need prime lenses. But then prime lenses are fixed, then they haven't got a zoom on. So you have to go right, well, I'll have a wide one and I'll have one that can zoom it, one that's a bit closer into them. And again, the idea is that you can just maximize these small windows that you get access to the set, either when they're doing it for you afterwards or during filming itself. But you want to be able to have as much possibility to capture
ready to go.
Close-ups.
You don't want to be basically. You don't want to be spending the time changing a lens because that might be the shot.
Just don't. And then the shot's gone, and then your window's gone, and honestly, sets move so quickly, so you have to be ready for lots of eventualities. So, it would be very unusual not to have both cameras on you at the same time, and it means that you can create very different imagery within seconds.
Well, I think that was an idea that Dan, you had recently, because you were directing Bambi, the horror movie that we've come to discuss, and that we'll do a full debrief on another part of this. but I think that you
should be doing the podcast.
You took your cue from sort of The Creator and films like that, in which they'd used a camera called a Sony FX3, which is a very small, amazing little camera, and relatively, I mean, it's an expensive camera, but by these things is a relatively cheap camera, which allowed a production to have, instead of just one very expensive main thing that then you've got to de-rig and change a lens, you almost have various different versions of that. One's on a gimbal, one's got a particular lens, one's got another lens, and then people literally, instead of having time to have the set break, they just go, hand me that, and the camera operator just takes that, or the director, and then takes that, and then takes that, and everything just moves quicker. That was a sort of similar principle, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was just about being as ready and as flexible as possible. It's recognizing what the sort of things are that could slow you down and working out solutions to those problems, especially when time is of the essence, which it sounds like it almost always is with stills, but it certainly is on an indie film. I mean, with Bambi, I think we had like 16 days or something like that to shoot the film, which is not enough time for a feature. You'd normally have at least 30. So it was just about being like, okay, well, where does time disappear during the day? And obviously lighting setup's a big thing, but constantly having to switch between like gimbal and tripod, that's like 10, 15 minutes almost like every time. So it was like, oh, well, we could save ourselves loads of those during the day by just having two cameras. That one's already in gimbal and one's already in tripod, which was just, it was super useful.
I think that's the key thing as well, because as I said, like being a photographer, you become part of the crew. You basically become part of the crew when you're on set, and you will be very aware of the productions that are working on a very condensed time frame. And it makes it even more important, A, the communication, but B, not taking up anyone's time. And if you know that they have to film a lot in a day, then you have to find a way of still getting what you need, but not slowing down the production, because Dan will tell you how stressful it is if you're running behind and you're behind schedule. There's nothing more stressful ever on set than that. So it's like it's a cool
actually
part
never
of the
happens.
job.
Jack, no set ever runs behind. Which we all know to be fiction. Wouldn't that be
and everyone's very relaxed.
Oh my
and it's
God,
just
so
like,
relaxed. Let's just take time.
Do you know what? I've never had anyone ever say to me on a set, "Take your time."
Jack, the important thing today is to really take your time and enjoy it.
You know what? I have said take your time to actors before.
Oh yeah.
deep down in my head, all I'm thinking is, I hope this makes them go faster. I hope this takes the pressure off and means they'll actually do it quickly, because they don't have time. But if I tell them they have time, then they won't panic and fluster. And because it's the one role you can't, if you fluster as an actor, then you don't have a take. Whereas, I mean, if you fluster as a focus puller, but no, I don't think that's gonna. It's not the same thing.
I think actors under pressure, they're amazing, and all the time I'm absolutely amazed, because I used to be an actor, and I'm amazed that people can stay that calm under pressure and produce the goods in a very tight time frame. But I do feel sorry for them for when there's very challenging stuff to do, and the director's going, "Yeah, take your time. It's all fine. But can you do it this take? Because we really, really need to move on." And and more often than not, they really will do it, and I find that extraordinary. I find that absolutely extraordinary.
And you must notice a difference. Sorry, I was just going to say, working on film, because you've worked on some indies before as well, and on these bigger like TV shows and stuff. Yeah. I think, did you work on Ed's film?
I did. I thought. I did.
Trick or Treat.
Trick or Treat. That's right.
Yeah. I thought I saw some stills on your website.
Yeah, I did. So that was a lot of fun, actually, and that was a great example of a film that was beautifully shot, and I had amazing actors in, but they were on a really tight schedule, and it was a really good example of going, right, well, they need quite a lot of imagery from me, because I'm only there for, I can't remember how many days, it's 4 or 5 days, but I need to capitalize on that time, whilst not taking up any of the very, very, very precious runtime. And because it's a horror, Dan, as you'll know, you're trying to create very atmospheric stuff, but on a very tight time schedule. So it's very, very difficult to do. But it's a great example of having, especially the more independent stuff, which is the stuff I love photographing, actually.
Yeah.
But it makes the job a little bit harder, because you're very, very conscious that everyone has a lot to do and literally zero time to do it. So it's
so interesting. And I know that, you don't just do on-set photography, you also do portrait photography of some very well-known actors. And, you've worked with, Ian McKellen, Roger Moore, to name a couple, who you've taken some regular portraits. So maybe can you just talk to us a little bit about that element? What are those portraits for, and how does that process work, working with an absolute legend like that? What is that process? I've been incredibly lucky to photograph some of my absolute heroes. The Roger Moore one was I went to his house, and he wanted some portraits done while he was in the UK. And so, I just turned up to this little cottage in the Cotswolds, and there was James Bond in front of me. It was very surreal. And I actually, I said that no one ever says take your time. I was with Roger Moore for about 2 or 3 hours, and he was regaling me with stories, Bond stories and on-set stories, and it was just so exciting. And he was really, really nice. And Ian McKellen was about to open Hamlet, which he did a few years ago, and he wanted some portraits in and around Windsor, because it sort of chimed with the show. And so again, I got a lot of time with him the first time I photographed him. I think I was probably with him for maybe an hour and a half, which is very unusual, because normally you get 15 minutes, 10 minutes. So I was really privileged. And then because I also photograph a lot of theatre, I got really lucky that I then got to photograph him for the next sort of 4 years across multiple productions. So that's been a huge sort of bonus and a real privilege. And what are you trying to do there? Because it's not like an actor's headshot, right? I mean, you're not just taking a generic picture of Sir Ian McKellen. When you go in, what is it what's the brief? Let's say for Ian McKellen, what would it be looking for?
For Ian McKellen, the brief was that they wanted to get the word out that they were working on both the film and the theatre production of Hamlet. They wanted some shots that reflected the process a bit, but also where they were making it, which was Windsor, and it was just after Prince Philip had died, so it was quite that was a very specific moment in time, and I think they wanted to capture that. But the brief is always different, and it really does depend. And I think they wanted this for publication in newspapers and magazines, and they wanted a sort of range of stuff that they could use.
And did you have a director with you? Because I mean, obviously, if Ian McKellen's giving you a particular look, and you sort of almost want to go moodier, darker, all that stuff, is that you giving that cue to him, or is there a director with you, sort of helping you to achieve that?
No, that was an example where it was just me and him in a room. And you're sort of there going, that was wonderful, Sir Ian. Can you do a little bit more of this? And you feel like you might be told to get out at any stage. But he was just so nice and very open to whatever I sort of needed him to do. So that was actually a really lovely example of it could have been a very scary experience because, he's one of my favourite actors.
So it really is you saying, Sir Ian, look into the back, give me the moody, come on, let's feel it.
Can we go for a bit of this? Or you just, quite often what you're doing, especially doing portrait stuff that might be used in newspapers or magazines, is that you're looking for stuff, especially when you first meet them, you're looking at their body language, what they do, little things that you can then bring into the photography. You're basically looking for strands, for things that you can tie back in. So if they do a particular thing or a particular pose, or they're sort of thinking and they end up sort of resting in a place, you go, oh, that's amazing. Can you just hold it there and I'll get a couple of images of that. But it's that thing of feeling you need to it takes a few years to feel emboldened enough to actually say to these amazing people, or with Leslie Manville, could you stand just this way, please? And
can you look over there?
And look over there.
Do that.
And one of my favourite shots from Sherwood that just came out was a shot where I had her for 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and I had to get a variety of stuff. And at one point there was a window, and I said, could you just stand there and look out the window that way? And that was my favourite shot, I think, from the entire series. And they used it, which then meant that I could use it as well. And, that's a real thrill when you kind of work on something with an actor and you end up with a piece of imagery that really sells the show or really fulfills the brief.
Because you're getting a lot of creative control. Because, for instance, a camera op in the similar situation, they aren't making those decisions about where and where they're looking and how. That's devolved to a different team, So you're like a one-person department.
But then, absolutely. But then that's different. That's absolutely the case. But at the same time, sometimes you are just trying to replicate what the camera did. So it's a bit of both. It's one of those ones where you're cobbling together as much. Different methods and ways of getting what you need in order to get the images that really spell out what the show is or give a sense of the mood or and a horror film sort of shot list that someone gives you will be very different to a rom-com shot list. They don't want the same thing. They want very worried looking people looking very scared, which wouldn't read very well for a rom-com, for instance. So you've got to really read what the final product will be and how the images will fit in with that.
Yeah. And I suppose before we take a trip down memory lane, a little bit of backtrack, let's just touch on, shall we, a little bit of just the sort of the techie software stuff, because I know that a lot of young people listening to this would have been familiar with touching up images. Maybe that's just adding filters or whatever, but obviously there are lots of softwares that they will have heard of that you can do this stuff in. It's not my area, but I've certainly heard of Lightroom, Adobe Photoshop, things like this. What do you use? What's your recommendation about that whole back-end process?
Well, I use those two a lot. I think it depends on what the project is. Quite often, you'll be delivering a lot of photographs from multiple days on a show, and quite often they'll want the color balance to match what the color balance was on set. So another key piece of advice I always give to photographers who are going into unit stills is find out what the DOP is shooting that day in terms of color temperature. So go and look at what's on his camera, then set it on your camera so that you automatically are looking at the same mood, the same style that they're photographing in. But quite often TV companies will want a relatively clean image. And what I mean by that is you haven't done too much of it yourself. You give them you give them a well-composed image that's fairly clean, and then they can do the retouching that they need to do. They can do the retouching that they need to do after that. So, you know, that's the kind of the key thing is to, you know, not do too much to an image that then makes it very difficult for them to work with the image afterwards.
So you're not adding like loads of grain and lens flares, and
well, you
you're not going all J.J. Abrams over.
No,
over
well, I mean, the key thing is, so a key part of the process, especially with unit stills, and actually with gallery shots and specials as well, which are the poster stuff, is that you'll want to give them a relatively clean image, and then they'll go away and they'll get a photo retoucher who will be looking at what the style of the show is, how they've shot it, and also how they've graded it, because the look of it might have changed a bit from when you saw it in the monitor to how it's now looking on screen.
Yeah.
So you want to give them as many options as possible to do what they need to do to the image to make it kind of fit in with the world of the movie or the TV show.
So is the balance there to do a little bit of what you think they're doing, but no more, or do you give them both? Do you give them the flat and the semi-graded, as it were? What
you do is you give them the basic things that you want to input into the image, but also what you're doing is you're giving them a JPEG, so they can just use the JPEG it's a good, because it'll be beautifully lit by the really amazing cinematographers who you're working with. They could use that pretty much straight out of camera and use the JPEG, but you also give them a version where the changes that you've done are sort of baked in, but they can be undone in Photoshop. But in terms of software, come back to James' original question, you're looking at Lightroom and you're looking at Photoshop, and Adobe Camera Raw as well, which I use a lot, just to do the basic adjustments, because you don't want to use a specific software that then when they're trying to, access the images, they don't have access to the software and can't make the changes. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to get the image and either undo everything you've done or work further down the path of what you've started to do.
So obviously, I know you mentioned earlier delivering about 300 images a day.
Yeah.
Are you taking 300 or are you taking like 900 and cutting it down to 300?
Yeah, you're not hedging your bets. No, you're taking quite a few. You're taking probably around 1,000, 1,200 maybe, or maybe less. And it really depends on what you've got access to that day. But what you're aiming to do is, say that you're photographing a scene. You've got to think about, well, I've got to get one where everyone who's in the scene is in that one shot. Then you've got to get kind of over the shoulder ones. You've got to get singles, and you've got to get close-ups, mids, wides of each actor. And you've also got to try and tell the story of the image across multiple images. You've got to, in one image, you've got to tell the story of the scene. Either someone who's in a great deal of turmoil, one character's in a great deal of turmoil in a very atmospheric looking room, or it could be a particular look that two actors share. So that's part of the job of a unit stills photographer, is to look at the whole scene and decide what the key moment is and what will tell the story best in terms of in one image without doing any spoilers.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there as well is it is more than, yes, it's photography skills, but there's a real understanding of film storytelling, of filmmaking, vocabulary and all the different frame sizes.
I think that's another piece of advice I'd give young people who want to do it, is that you've really got to understand the process of filmmaking in order to fit into it. You've got to understand who the key people are on set. You've got to understand who you need to talk to, and also when to talk to them, when not to talk to them, and who they need you to be. And quite often, as a photographer, you have to be a bit of a chameleon, because sometimes you've got to be a certain type of person to get the shot that you need that day, and sometimes you've got to be a very different type of person. You've got to be very, very hypersensitive to what's going on set, because chances are, one day it will be a very light day and everyone feels in a very good mood, and the next day everyone's under an intense amount of pressure, maybe because they've had to add 2 extra scenes onto the day, or because one particular scene has taken much longer to record because to film because the weather's not done what it was meant to do, or whatever it is. And so you have to read the room that's my key piece of advice, really, in terms of being
people skills, not just technical skills and filmmaking skills.
Read people, read the set, read the atmosphere, and work out under those circumstances how to get the images that that they need you to get, whilst not disrupting anything and not becoming an annoyance. Because the worst thing on earth would be if you became the one particular annoying aspect of being on set that day. You don't want to be that person.
So I suppose it's with all of those skills in mind, if we take that trip down memory lane, we always take our guests on this pod back to their teenage years. And, I suppose, first of all, what were you up to? Like, were you the kid with the camera then, or was the photography something you discovered later? Just give us a sense of your progression.
So the photography was very much a second, it came later. So when I was at school, I did GCSE drama, and the drama teacher persuaded me to audition for the National Youth Theatre. So I did, without really sort of imagining you'd ever get the opportunity to do it. And then I somehow got in, and then I proceeded over the next couple of years to do a couple of shows with them that went to the Edinburgh Festival and then played at the Lyric Hammersmith. And that was a great experience. Then I went to Manchester University, and I did acting there. And then I went to LAMDA and trained to be an actor there, and then tried it for a few years. So I'd done some on-set stuff, I'd done theatre stuff, and I very much understood the process of how it worked. And then I was very interested in photography, and someone handed me a camera one day and said, "Could you do some headshots for me? Because I don't want to pay X £100 to go and get it done because I'm completely broke." So I did some headshots, and I decided I really liked doing that. So I did that for a few years. Then I moved into theatre, and because I knew how rehearsal rooms worked and I knew how shows worked, I started doing that. And then it was sort of by osmosis, you sort of ended up being on sets. And for me, like most people, I turn into a big kid on set. I'm so excited to be there, and the magic of it is always there. I just adore being on set, and honestly, it's like watching. It's like going to Disney World. You're watching in wonder at how they're putting this stuff together, and that never gets old. So that's the best bit of the job, and it does chime back to what I did when I was younger, because I've got a deep love and understanding of what happens in a theatre and what happens on a set. And it might not have worked out for me with the acting, but I really still wanted to be part of that process. And this way, I do still feel really part of it. And every day is completely thrilling. I love it. It really is. For me, it's one of the best jobs in the world.
Mm-hmm. And what would be that piece of advice if you have to go back and whisper in teenage Jack's ear a piece of wisdom? What would you be whispering in your ear?
I think what I'd say is, because I was one of those teenagers who was always looking for a way to express themselves, I suppose. So I started off by being a singer-songwriter, and then which I continued doing, and then for a bit, and then I was an actor, and then I was a photographer. And so what I'd say to people is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. For instance, when I went to LAMDA and trained to be an actor, I thought that, it was the end of the world if it didn't work out with acting. And I thought, I just don't know what my life is without it. And what I hadn't really factored in is that there were lots of other ways of expressing yourself and being part of a creative process of something you love, even if it is not the route that you initially thought it would be. So what I'd say to people is, if you feel like you've got that in you to be creative, don't narrow yourself down to one thing that you think is the only way that you'll have of being creative. There are lots and lots of different ways that you can do that. And my career at this point sort of proved that to me. But what I'd also say in terms of one piece of advice for anyone who's interested in being a unit stills photographer specifically is just get out there and do as much as you can. And what I mean by that is short films. Short films are the absolute key. They're the way that you understand how sets work. They're the way that you understand how to photograph within that context. And there's endless short films being made all the time by people all over the country. So what I'd say to you is, go and find either, get in touch with the London Film School or whoever it is and find some short films that you won't be paid for, but you'll just learn a lot and it will build up your portfolio. But it'll also, you'll decide whether or not that is the job for you.
The thing you love, yeah.
The thing you love. And also you'll learn so much about the right way to go about it. And the key thing is you'll also work out the wrong way to go about it, and you'll make all the mistakes then when you're not being paid to do it. And the stakes are a lot lower. And you've got to go and make mistakes before you realize the right way to do things. You've got to go and do them all the wrong way first.
Well, that is brilliant. I mean, I think we will have so many young people, Jack, listening to this who, as I say, might have thought, I love taking photographs, but I just think it's a different thing from filmmaking. And I think listening to you, hopefully, they will have seen that these different interests can be meshed. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. We love having you with us to photograph our young filmmakers, and we can't wait to see you next year.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you about it.
James, I can't remember how many times I've said this, but my favourite sort of saying in terms of growth and stuff is that getting good at something is running out of mistakes to make. And I feel validated every time I hear other people sort of say that. It's about sort of that practice. It's about getting things wrong as well as getting things right, which I think just giving yourself permission to fail is just such a powerful thing that one can do with whatever endeavour or creative endeavour or even business endeavour. I feel like endeavours of all kinds welcome here,
100%.
To Camp Failure.
I totally agree. And it's that spirit, actually, that we have at Young Film Academy, right? It's just get out and do it. You've got an idea, you want to make a movie, let's go. I mean, yes, we've got a week, 2 weeks, 4 days, whatever, but let's go do it. And it won't be perfect. But boy, you're going to learn a ton from doing it, because you don't learn from sitting around talking about maybe doing it. That is not a learning process. You do learn when you're out on that set doing the thing. And I also think it was great to really delve into some of the detail of photography on sets, because we have seen a lot of young people at Young Film Academy who are interested in still images in some ways, and they're trying to in some ways experiment to see, does that cross over, because there've been some very famous filmmakers who come from a still photography background, and I think they are close cousins, if not, they may not be brothers sisters, but they may be close cousins. And to hear what Jack does, and also how he sort of the human stuff, right, on sets. It's not just about the technical ability to deliver the thing. It's about reading the room, understanding the thing. And actually Jack's background as an actor, which again, so many young people do, right? My background was kind of similar. We start off doing that as a form of expression, and then you find that maybe that's not quite right for you and what else you can go into. And then hearing the way that Jack's taken skills and you just add to your skill set along the way. So you don't jettison the acting abilities and the knowledge that you pick up from there. You just start to add other skills, and then before you know it, you've morphed into a different creative creature in some way.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there is that transferability, I think, from having creativity requires a certain, in tuneness with emotions and all sorts of things, to sort of put yourself in. It requires empathy, I think, is like the key thing, right? Both from the creativity of what you're doing, because you're often, when you're photographing someone or you're capturing someone, if you're a cinematographer or a director, you're having to put yourself in other people's shoes, but then also having the empathy to understand what everyone else is up to and feeling around you then allows you to do that thing better as well. So it's almost like the two fronts to the creative, and then also to the human work side of it as well, which I think is key. And I think, whether you start as an actor, where that requires an incredible amount of empathy to put yourself in other people's shoes, literally, in other people's shoes. And play other people.
Give me those shoes. Yeah. Totally.
Yes, I think those are what my character would wear.
It's actually, we didn't talk to Jack about body language, because I know that Jack was talking quite a lot about sort of that thing, when the camera had a clicky shutter that he had. That was so funny. I had to put it in a giant blimp, and then you're trying to sort of fade into the background. Don't mind me, everybody, but I've just got this giant thing. And actually now, watching Jack work, he's very nimble. You have to sort of fit into quite small spaces. Do you know what I mean? You have to just be bodily not in the way, as well as sort of, schedulingly not in the way. And that says body language, because I think you and I have talked to, maybe on this pod before, maybe not, maybe it was off mic, as it were, but about, the Hasselblad camera, the old style camera where it's just sort of famous photographers like Don McKellen used to use, where they would, instead of looking direct through a viewfinder at the person. So if I'm taking a photograph of you, it's quite difficult to do on a podcast, but I'm demonstrating it live here. Great video content for audio. But my eye line sort of looks through the viewfinder at you. So when I'm taking the photo, you really feel that I'm looking at you. Whereas with a Hasselblad, you used to look down. So physically, it looked downwards. And I always think that was a lot less intrusive of your subject, because they didn't really feel anything was looking at them, even though it was.
Yeah, it's really weird how that it completely changes the dynamic of someone, squinting through with one eye, but their face angled directly at you, and then it makes the lens feel even more imposing because that's also pointing at you. Whereas them looking down into this little screen, or I don't know, into their own little art world is it's far more welcoming.
Totally.
I don't know.
And being aware of just
I've been on the receiving end of
how far away you are from your subjects. And Jack talking about different lenses. At what point do you have to get up quite close in the action? At what point do you sort of stand back from the action? And Jack's using all that sort of acting ability, understanding of what a set is, what a rehearsal room is, reading the room. It's a really lovely organic set of skills, as well as, of course, delivering technically. They've got to be really good pictures that look really in focus, that are really great colours, and or lack of. But
absolutely. James, we've got a question.
Oh yeah,
this question is from Rita from Essex, and Rita wonders. She says, "I'm looking to get my first stills camera for photography. What camera shall I get?"
Great question.
James, with your encyclopedic knowledge of cameras, would you like to take this one?
Well, not really, in truth, but I will give it my best go. I mean, my impression at the moment is that we are sort of, the camera on your phone. I mean, there's this other expression, right? That the best camera is the camera that you have with you. You've heard that a lot. And I've listened to a lot of professional photographers talking about that. It's like you can have the best bit of kit, but if it's too big or too cumbersome, or you don't want to take it with you, you just don't take it with you. And then you find that that's the moment you need it. And actually, phone cameras have become so good. I mean, we're now, of course, in this interesting thing with AI now, where the phone is actually doing a lot of work to change the picture at the moment of taking it against your will. There actually is a philosophical question. What is a photograph? Which is not something we need to go into now, but it's actually like, if you are not recording the light that you think you are, you're actually, the phone itself or the software is doing a whole series of changes before you've even asked it to do changes. What is a photograph?
Google, I think, pushes that the most. Have you seen their things where you can tap on someone's face and it will give you 4 or 5 other versions of that person's face from the photographs you've taken around that photo? So basically, if someone's blinking, you can tap and sort that out, and then next thing you know, you've swapped out everyone's face, body parts, and all sorts to create the perfect, air quotes, photo.
Well,
but then,
I think this is. I think
certainly an image.
I think a lot of photographers are facing a fairly existential crisis right now, because the AI software has come first for still imagery, and it will come and is coming for video. Difficult and long form content, certainly for a while. But if it's just about altering or producing a single image out of nothing, things are moving so fast. But back to Rita's question, I mean, so on the one hand, I think it's the best camera is the one they've got with you, and a lot of it is, you've now in the palm of your hand got a camera that certainly 10 years ago we could never dream of having, or 20 years. And I know that a lot of the newer models of camera are actually giving more functionality in terms of you can actually replace the lens in a virtual way, can't you? And you can sort of play with a lot of the tools that were considered more pro within a phone camera now are sort of available. I mean, frankly, 99% of people don't bother with them. 99.9%, they just snap on the auto default settings. But you can do a lot with those. And then I suppose, it's going mirrorless if you want to, and whether you want to then have some video content as well. I suppose that would be the other alternative, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those are the key things. I think realistically, I think if you're spending sub £300, then it's highly probable your phone camera will do a better job. That's the first honest truth. But anything over sort of £300, I think you're probably looking more like 400 upwards. That's when you can get either a good
an entry-level DSLR, but obviously mirrorless is the new thing.
Yep.
It is the new
But
way.
it's more
They are
expensive,
silent,
right?
they're better, but they are more expensive. Yeah, I was just on Amazon now. But definitely, if you want to get into photography, definitely get something that allows interchangeable lenses, because you want to buy something that means you can buy new lenses and experiment with that. That's such an important part of the journey and the learning experience of being a photographer.
And I suppose
I
it's
see
understanding that lenses also have different ecosystems. I mean, you can get adapters, but if you're on the Sony lens mount or the Canon lens mount, of which there are multiple, I mean, it can get a bit confusing, but do be aware that not every lens fits on every camera, and which is like film, and that you then might have to buy adapters, but then adapters change the amount of light coming in, and that in itself can be a thing, you know. So sometimes it's choosing a universe you want and then building within that universe, right?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stick with one for like at least the initially build up some of those lenses. You could always get an adapter, but yeah, start to build up things, and you get to experience how each one works differently as well. But they all generally will come with a zoom lens, which will be more than enough to get you started. It will generally go from wide to mid range, so good for portraiture, but then also wide angle stuff as well. They never come with like long zoom lenses, but you can get one of those in due course. And I would say as well, stick to a trusted brand for your actual camera. You, by all means, try out interesting lenses if you want, but you know, I'd be sticking with your Canons, your Sonys, your Nikon or Nikon, however you say it, Lumix as well. You know, those sort of trusted ones. I saw on Amazon there's like a Sony Alpha ZV E10L. Never used it, but it looks good, and that's got a flip out screen so you can do video with it, but also has interchangeable lenses and is a mirrorless camera, and that's $599 down from $769. So that's Dan's recommendation, having never used it. Don't know if it's any good, but it looks like a good balance of quality versus functionality, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's Canon ones available for cheaper. Yeah. There you
Great.
go.
Well, good luck, Rita. Go and take some amazing images on whatever you have with you.
Absolutely. And we will see you guys in the next episode. So thank you very much for joining us.
We will. See you next time.
See you next time. Don't forget to send us your questions to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk.